working for you. This is 23 News at 5.
Rockford officials warn that making prank 911 calls is anything but a laughing matter. 23 News reporter Jim Haggerty learns how dispatchers and local law enforcement are dealing with those prank calls, which are unfortunately all too common.
They are indeed. Officials say while some may find making false emergency calls can mean a few laughs, they also could have very serious consequences.
Rockford 911, where's the emergency?
Area 911 centers receive hundreds of calls each day, including mistakes, hang-ups, and pranks. Officials say anyone who plans to misuse the system for their own amusement should know that their calls will be traced and they will be located.
We do have tools that we can use. If someone calls 911 and they say that they're one location, but they're actually at a different location, we're able to tell.
Most pranksters are issued a warning. However, those who continue can be arrested and charged with making a false 911 call, which is a felony in Illinois.
We'll send the police out to investigate.
Rockford 911 Assistant Supervisor Sally Chance says making a false 911 call can have very dangerous and even deadly consequences.
We only have so many call takers, and when the one or even two call takers is tied up on somebody making a false call, then that leaves only one or two other people to handle all the other emergent calls that could be coming in.
And when that happens, it can impede first responders from serving the community, something that does not sit well with area residents and members of the medical field.
It's taken away from our tax dollars and wasting time, where what if we have a real emergency?
Time is critical. We need to be able to get to those people hurting right away. And if they're being tied up from someone else, then that doesn't help us.
Officials say tracking 911 calls made from landlines and mobile phones is simple. However, it can be tricky when someone on a mobile phone is moving at the time of the call or they're using more than one device, but they're almost always located.
The United States 911 system receives about 183 million calls every year, which is 1 in 4 calls coming from a wireless phone.